Welcome back to Violent Money TV. Today, I'm joined by Cheyanne Bowers, who fights for the interim flyweight title at LFA 193. To kick things off, I mean, your opponent, Veronika Borisova, is undefeated. How do you kind of approach fighting an undefeated opponent in terms of working out? I'm sure you're able to find footage of places she's been tested and things like that. It's not like she's completely dominated every single one of those wins, but how do you approach that knowing you're going up against someone who hasn't tasted a defeat before?
Honestly, I think it plays to my favor. We really haven't changed my game plans. We haven't changed how I train or anything like that just because she's undefeated. At the end of the day, she's still a human. She's going to have flaws and openings that we can capitalize on. But really, my focus this camp has been primarily on how to get the fight where I want it to take place. So initiating my game plan first, getting that to happen right away, and then kind of seeing how the rounds go from there. So really, overall, hasn't changed too much just because she's got a 6-0 record. More so, just trying to implement my game plan first, and hopefully, it works out in that first round.
What's that balance like for kind of preparing for a certain style versus, I know that speak to a lot of fighters, especially fighters that are still, in the first few fights of their pro career, and a lot of them will say that the focus is predominantly on themselves and just being the best version of themselves. Obviously, at this kind of level, you get it a lot where opponents switch around at late notice and things like that as well. So I'm sure it helps with that. But obviously, this is a title fight. So I'm sure there's probably been a little bit more prep done in terms of preparing for her specifically. Is that fair?
Yeah, no, absolutely. We've definitely looked at what her strengths are and worked on proper defense to those things, how we can counter those things. And yeah, like you said, I still very much work on just making sure I'm the best version of myself when I walk into the cage. But I would say we put a little bit more time and effort into, game planning around what she's strong at, what she's weak at. This was the longest camp I've ever had. So I had 12 weeks to kind of mentally and physically prepare for that. Most of my camps have been like 4 weeks. So had way more time to like figure out the details of what she's good at and figuring out our game plan to go along with that.
Obviously, for people who haven't been keeping up to date with LFA, the reason this is an interim title fight, obviously the flyweight champion just competed on Contender Series. I'm sure that was a fight you saw. I think every MMA fan saw it because of the way it ended.
Yeah.
Shannon Clark was stopped in the first round. In one of the craziest knockouts I've seen. I think just across women's MMA in general. What was your reaction to see? I mean, for me in the UK, I wake up and all of that stuff has already happened because of the time delay. So
Right.
I get the reaction on social media like hours after it happens, but I'm sure it was a crazy thing to experience, in the moment.
Yeah, for sure. I actually got home from training and my manager called me and he was like, "Have you watched the Contender Series fights yet?" And I was like, "Nope, just got home, we had to shower, do all that stuff." So I was like, "I'm gonna sit down right now and watch the replays." And as soon as I got done watching, I called him back. I was like, "Dang, that was unexpected to say the least." So yeah, wish her the best. I have high respect for Shannon. Depending on what happens after my fight next Friday, her and I could be seeing each other in the LFA cage or potentially in the UFC down the road. So, wish her the best when she's recovering, and then hopefully I'll get to see her across the cage someday.
Yeah, I'm sure, with a promotion like LFA, like I said, when you suddenly get to the point where you're either a main event or a title fight, it's like, things can change so quickly in terms of getting a late notice call from another promotion or the multiple avenues into the UFC now through Contender Series, but also Road to UFC. I was speaking to Mark Climaco, who had that happen to him, and now he's back in LFA. Like, is that something you have to try and block out going into these fights because you know that LFA is a promotion that the UFC and even not even just the UFC, the other major promotions in the world have got their eyes on at all times. And so if you're a main event or a title fight, there is a certain degree of spotlight that comes with that.
Yeah, for sure. I definitely have felt that pressure when I first started camp. But I work with a sports psychiatrist and I see her weekly. And she's really helped me kind of taper that down. And, she's primarily helped me focus that at the end of the day, regardless of what happens next Friday, win or lose, come Monday morning, I still wake up, I go to work, I go to train, my family's still here. They're all still healthy. So at the end of the day, my life really isn't going to change that much, regardless of the outcome. Yes, there could be a magical phone call that happens the week after if I get that W. And maybe I get a short notice call up to the UFC, which would be awesome. That's what everyone wants. But I'm just trying to keep everything in perspective that at the end of the day, the things that matter the most are still going to be there. So that's really helped me focus on what I can control, which is my effort, my attitude, and just putting forth the best performance I can.
How long have you been working with a sports psychologist? That's, I think, definitely a thing that is happening more in MMA. You definitely hear that spoken about more with each year. But I don't know if I've spoken to too many fighters at this stage in their career who have done that, because it does feel like I said, it's still something that I think MMA is kind of slowly picking up on. You know, the value of having that.
Yeah, I have seen a therapist and a counselor on and off for most of my life, just kind of when I needed it. And then once I really got to the pro level, I specifically sought out a therapist that focused on sports performance. I'm actually her first fighter of any sort. She's had a few NFL guys, a couple guys that play for our Sky Force, which would be like our NBA D League team that's here in town. So she's had some high level elite athletes, but I'm definitely her first fighter. And she is kind of like a mom a little bit. I'll come in sometimes and have, little scratches or black eyes, things like that. And she's all nervous. She's like, I just worry so much about you. But no, she's been really great for my mental health, both inside and outside of the cage. And just, yeah, I would say like the last 2 years, probably I've really honed in on the mental side of things, and just how that plays a role. At the end of the day, like most fighters come in physically prepared for the fight. It's just who can mentally turn it on once the cage door is locked. So I think that's really helped me evolve since turning pro.
Yeah, I mean, when we talk about the kind of spotlight that comes with competing in a promotion like LFA, I you have one of the fights that I think, like, I remember, without even searching for it, seeing people talk about and stuff, which was when you went up against Alex Pereira's sister, which at the time was like obviously a huge thing because of how well he's transitioned from being a kickboxer to being an MMA. And so it's always going to be a big deal if even even seeing former opponents of his from kickboxing then turn into MMA fighters, that's a big deal. So of course, his own family is going to be a big deal as well. What was that like in terms of I'm sure there was a little bit more pressure, a little bit more eyes on that fight because the fact that you were going up against, a member of the Pereira family.
Yeah, I've pretty much been an underdog in every sport I've ever played, every fight I've ever had. Um, because I come from such a small area in the middle of South Dakota, nobody knows about me. Nobody knows about our gym. And so when I got the call and they offered me that fight, my manager and my coach, we were ecstatic. Obviously huge threat on the feet, but grappling's my game. And so I knew if I could get her down, I could stay on top. And that's exactly what I did for all 3 rounds. So, I think I'm not entirely sure if she's fought since then. I haven't really kept up too much with how her path has kind of transcended, but she has the skills and the makings of a great MMA fighter. And clearly her brother's transitioned very well. So I think we are going to see her in the future down the road at the UFC level. But I had a chip on my shoulder. I wanted to prove like, hey, I'm this no name that just stuffed your big superstar. So yeah, it was a good feeling.
Yeah, I bet. I mean, I remember Alex right near the start of his MMA career had a loss quite early on, and immediately people are going to throw questions of, "Oh, this guy isn't going to make it. He can't grapple." And obviously, it worked out pretty well for him in the long term. So, I'm not too sure either if she has fought since. So I'd be interested to check up on that and see whether she still has plans to. You mentioned the grappling then, which obviously is the kind of core of your game. What is the background that you came into MMA from? Just from being on the opposite side of the pond as it was, I just assume that any MMA fighter that comes from America has a wrestling background. Usually, it's kind of just like throwing a dart randomly. If you land on wrestling, you're probably correct, but I thought I'd ask you myself.
Yeah. So when I went to college, I was actually a cross country and distance track runner. So I competed 4 years at that. I could have easily made atom weight. I was like 100 pounds soaking wet at that time. But once I got out of college and, I wasn't chasing after Olympic dreams or anything like that with a marathon. So I just was looking for something competitive. And my now husband, he introduced me to jujitsu, and he was like, "Hey, like, I just want you to know some self defense while you're out running in case something were to happen." And then I learned you could compete, and that just kind of snowballed everything from there. And my coach Bruce Hoyer, he was a IBJJF world champion. I want to say like 2007, 2008, that time frame. So he's been at the top of the jiu-jitsu world for a long time, both competitively and coaching, and he's helped me evolve so quickly in the last 5 years. Yeah, so now I'm a purple belt under him, and yeah, that's kind of how it all started. I had no wrestling background, no combat anything. Didn't even have karate as a kid. I grew up in a town of like a couple thousand people, so nothing like that was available to us. So I just kind of learned on the fly as I was an adult.
You mentioned your husband there. I saw that you got married a few weeks ago, so congratulations to
Thank
that.
you.
But how was that kind of transitioning from getting married to then, I imagine, starting a fight camp, or had you already kind of started to at least get ready for, kind of the pre-fight camp
Yeah.
preparation?
We had a inkling that this fight was going to happen in September, well before we even got confirmation of it. So at the start of the summer, we kind of started figuring out, all right, like weddings at this time. So we're going to start dieting this X amount of weeks out. We're going to start, conditioning this many weeks out. So I had already kind of planned on like fitting the wedding into all of that chaos. It was definitely a challenge, but one well worth it for sure. Um, yeah, so basically, for like 2 days, camp was on pause while the wedding was happening, and then it picked right back up on Monday morning. So, nothing too crazy. It was super fun. Both of us are very glad the planning part of it is all over. And we're just ready to get a little break of all the stress and chaos after the fight.
Yeah, yeah. Well, it really is like from one stressful thing that requires a lot of planning straight into another, right? An LFA title
Exactly.
fight. So one thing into the next. Cheyanne, thank you so much for your time and all the best for this fight. And I'm sure we'll catch up with you at some point in the future.
Awesome. Thank you so much for having me.
No problem. Have a good rest of your day. Yeah, we'll catch you later.
See ya.
Thank you.
Bye.